Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace, calling North America to repentance and revival.
Well, thank you for joining us here today at the Corner of Truth and Courage. You're listening to Fortress of Faith. This is Tom Wallace. Well, some exciting news is coming out of Washington, D.C. Senator Ted Cruz from Texas has brought forth legislation trying to get a bill passed about designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Now, folks, I've been bemoaning this issue for quite some time here. America is unsafe until we properly recognize that the Muslim Brotherhood coming out of Egypt is a legitimate terrorist organization. Now, this bill is also being co-sponsored by Tom Cotton, Republican out of Arkansas, and John Bozeman from Arkansas, Rick Scott from Florida, Ashley Moody, and Dave McCormick. However, the issue is that Ted has brought this up a few other times. We tried to get this, on the books back in 2015, 2017, 2020, 2021. And each time it doesn't really get out of committee and it doesn't get onto the floor. Hopefully, now that we have a Trump administration and his agenda is being passed through legislation, through the halls of legislation there in Washington, D.C., we may finally have some steam to address this important situation. You need to understand, international organizations, other countries have already designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Austria, Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and others have already said, yeah, this is a terrorist organization. The most important of that list is Egypt itself. If anyone would really know what the Muslim Brotherhood is about, would be Egypt. Why? Well, because it was started in Egypt. Its foundations are there, and its operating control has been largely in Egypt until Egypt finally kicks them out. Let's take a look at the Muslim Brotherhood here today. Who are they? And why our country should designate them as a terrorist organization. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928. The man who started it, Hassan al-Banna, and he resided in Egypt. Now, you need to have a little bit of backstory to understand what was going on in the world. In the 1920s, World War II was coming to an end, and the Ottoman Empire sided with Germany, with the Axis powers, and they lost. They lost the war, and it brought about the end of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottomans ruled in Turkey, and they pretty much controlled the Islamic world for about 500, 600 years prior. So, from the 1900s back to the 1400s, this is where Islam was ruled from. You need to understand that in Islam, you have one leader. They do not understand words like democracy or representation. No, they're led by a dictator, so to speak, an emperor. Muhammad was building an empire. That's not hard to understand if you know a little bit about the story of Muhammad and what he was building in Arabia. And so when he died, the biggest question was who would succeed him? Who would become the caliph? Now, a caliph might be a word that you and I would better understand as emperor. And every emperor has to have an empire. So the caliph has to have his empire. And what do we call that? The Khalifa, or the Caliphate. And so through the years, the Khalifa of Islam moved out of Arabia. It moved out of Arabia into Syria. So the Islamic world was ruled from there. And then it moved up into what we would call Iraq, and in that area. And the Islamic world was ruled there. And then it moved over to Turkey. And now what was interesting there is that these were not Arabs there. These were Turks. But they controlled the Islamic, or the Arab and Muslim world. And so everything fell under the dictates of the emperor, the Khalifa, the Caliph. This all came to an end in 1920. And when that happened, you need to understand that under the Ottoman Empire, they kind of reformed the religion. We might call them liberals. I prefer to call them reformed. We reformed the religion of Islam during that period of time. They began to take the sword and the jihad and all that, militant stuff, and they kind of said, well, that really doesn't apply to us today. That really applies to the 7th century, to the day of Muhammad. That's not really for us today. And so they started developing a kinder, gentler form of Islam. And Muslims began to grow up in this and being indoctrinated with this new teaching of Islam. And also it helps when most of your Islamic world can't read or write. And it also helps when, if they could read or write, that we demand, well, you can only read it in Arabic. And so most of the Muslims in the world really don't know what's in the Quran. They really don't. When I started dealing with Muslims and evangelizing them in missions and dealing in this area, I was so surprised at how ignorant they were about their own religion, how little that they knew. And that is largely due to the fact that they can't read it, and there's no verses in the Quran that says, study to show thyself approved unto God, and so on there. So during the Ottoman Empire, they began to reform the religion and take the sword and put it away in the 7th century and leave it with Muhammad. Well, when they came to an end, it caused the opportunity for the fundamentalists, who really knew Islam, really knew what Muhammad taught, really knew that Muhammad demanded of the faithful to kill the unbeliever and to lay in siege for them and beleaguer them. And this gave an opportunity for the rise of fundamentalism. And so there were 3 different big movements of fundamentalism. One was the Wahhabis over in Saudi Arabia. The other was the Shiites up in Iran. And the third were the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and the founder of that was Hassan al-Banna. Now, with this information of the background of what's going on, you need to understand what was their goal, what was their mission. Well, number one, it was to turn the Muslim world back to the fundamental teachings of Islam. And when people got out of line, they brought the sword of Islam into play. And so one of the things that they tried to do in Egypt is to assassinate their president, Gamal Nasser. They tried to assassinate him up in Alexandria on October 26 back in 1954. Well, it failed. And as a result of that, the Muslim Brotherhood was thrown out of Egypt. But that didn't stop them. And then during the trade of power, Anwar Sadat came into power, and he negotiated for the Muslim Brotherhood to come out of hiding and to regain themselves in Egypt, and he used them for his strength, for his benefit. Well, then he made the mistake of agreeing to a peace agreement with Israel. Well, this did not go very well with the fundamentalists, and again the Muslim Brotherhood rose up to assassinate the president of Egypt, and they succeeded this time. I remember as a little boy, wasn't quite little, in 1981, but as a child watching on TV, I think this was the first time I saw a real live assassination. You probably saw it during the military parade there in Cairo, the attack on Sadat and him being murdered and killed. Well, this is the group we're talking about, the Muslim Brotherhood. And so then again, what happened? They were banned from Egypt and thrown out. But slowly but surely, after time, they began to drift back in. And then we had the Arab Spring in Egypt back in 2011. This is when I started on the radio. It wasn't long after being on the radio that these events began to unfold. And I made a prediction. I thought, man, this is going out on an edge here, on the limb, just starting on radio and making a prediction. That you watch it, the Muslim Brotherhood will somehow get a candidate elected as the president and it did happen. And I was correct. Morsi was elected, and it wasn't long after he was elected that he began to seize powers that didn't really belong to him or to his office. Then later he was removed under a military coup led by the current president, al-Sisi, who actually then did turn the power back over to the people and held a proper election for president. And everything I've seen, and not everything I've agreed with necessarily with al-Sisi, but for the most part, he has been a good president for their country. From the Muslim Brotherhood came Hamas. Hamas was started by the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's said so, it's right there in their charter. The charter came out in 1987 during the First Intifada, and the charter is officially called the Covenant of Islamic Resistance Movement. Now, when you take that acrostic from English or use it into the Arabic, you come up with Hamas. And so Hamas was started in August of 1988 by the Muslim Brotherhood. And that is extremely clear in Article number 2. Let me read just a portion of it. The Islamic Resistance Movement is one of the wings of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. So that is who they are. So that's their militant side. But I've been saying for quite some time that the Muslim Brotherhood is the most dangerous terrorist organization on the face of the earth. Why? Because usually they don't go around with bombs and bullets and the sword and threatening warfare. But what they do is dress in suits, dress as businessmen, politicians, diplomats, and they come and live amongst us and do their deeds behind the scene. It's the enemy within the gates. And they have organizations that are at work here in the United States. Their biggest is CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, that are 2 blocks away from Congress in Washington, D.C. And what's interesting is that other international countries have designated CARE also as a terrorist organization because of their connections with the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a good move by Ted Cruz. We need to get behind it. We need to get this passed. We need to get this to be official for the safety of our country. Well, that's going to be it for today. Join us again tomorrow at the Corner of Truth and Courage. God bless you.